Good morning, church.
Morning.
Are your feet wet yet? If it keeps raining like this, folks are going to get baptized whether they want to or not. And may it come on. It's been really neat. All the dry weather that we've had, and now we're getting all wet weather. And I'm not complaining. Anyone out there wants to complain, please kindly step outside until you're finished, and then you can come back in. We have been talking in Luke, the 15th chapter, and we've been looking at a set of three parables. We've looked at the parable of the lost sheep and the parable of the lost coin. All of these were set into motion or set into place because the Pharisees were complaining about the people that Jesus was being around, that he was staying with, that he was talking to, that he was eating at their table. And he began to explain to them that if one of your sheep is lost, you go find it. If a coin is lost, you go find it. Not because it is the money, but it is the significance of what it stands for. The coin is a badge of honor for the woman. The sheep being lost is not credible to a good shepherd, and you go seek it. This one that we're going to look at today is one that we probably know best by the prodigal son. And he kind of fits into this one a little bit differently than the other two, but nonetheless, it's there. Now, I know you've heard me preach a lot about the prodigal son, especially when I talked about my sister, because I paralleled her life very much with the story of this young man. Now, one thing I'd like to get straight is the word prodigal does not mean errant or rebellious. Prodigal means spendthrift. He was an individual that was let his money go to his head. He went basically spent everything that he could get his hands on. The irony of it is that he is the second-born son, so the inheritance that he was entitled to was minor in portion or proportion to that which his brother would receive. And so it says in Luke, the 15th chapter, beginning in the 11th verse, he said, a certain man had two sons, and the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of my estate that falls to me. And he divided his wealth between them. And not many days later, the younger son gathered everything together, and he went on a journey into a distant country, and there he squandered his estate with loose living. Now that he had spent everything, a severe famine occurred in the country, and he began to be in need. And he went and he attached himself to one of the citizens in the country, of that country, and he sent him into the fields to feed the swine. And he longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the swine were eating, and no one gave anything to him. But when he came to his senses, he said, how many of my father's hired men have more than enough bread, but I'm here dying with hunger? I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me as one of your hired men. And he got up and he came to his father, but while he was still a long way off, the father saw him and felt compassion on him. And he embraced him and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to the slaves, quickly, bring out the robe and put it on him. Put the ring on his hand and sandals on his feet, and bring the fattened calf and kill it, that we may eat and be merry. For this son of mine that was dead has come to life again, but he was lost and has been found. And they began to be merry. Now, as you heard in our scripture reading, you heard the last part of that one. And probably we should talk about that one at some point. But what I want to focus on is the youngest son. Because what he did One writer that I read has said that this is probably the most perfect story of what sin is and how sin works. One of the things that he did is that he was evidently a part of a wealthy family. His father divided what he had that would be his, and he gave it to him. Now then, it's not always the smartest thing for parents to do is give a large sum of money to their children, because just like everybody today, whether they are young or medium or old, they spend it, and sometimes in the wrong ways. But there was in this young man a sense of rebellion. And no doubt that sense of rebellion was there long before he came to his father and asked him, "Can I have what is to be mine?" Remember, the father's still alive. He's saying, "I want my inheritance, and I want it now." And he went away into a distant country. Now then, this is where it parallels the sheep, in that he left the comfort of his father's house and he went into a distant country. And there, with a purse full of money, he was probably the most popular man in town. And he spent everything that he had to buy his friends, to buy riotous living, to do everything that he had always wanted to do that he could not do under his father's oversight. Now, the interesting thing in this parable is that when it was all gone, he attached himself to a citizen of that country who sent him out to feed the swine. Now, the interesting thing is that we assume that this is a Jewish child, and a Jew in pork don't mix. But yet here he was, wallowing in the mire with the pigs, no doubt living close by. And what pigs I've been around, you can't get far enough away to get rid of that smell. It stays with you for a long time. But better yet, this young man was looking at the food they were eating, the carob pods, and they were looking kind of tasty. It was more than he had, and he longed to even consider eating what the pigs were eating. Now, the best statement in this is that he says, when he came to his senses, when he came to himself, when he began to think like a rational individual, he began to realize that when he drifted away, when he left, everything that he had at home was better than what he had now. And he began to rationalize the fact that my father's got all kinds of servants and they have plenty to eat. They have a good place to sleep. They're treated well. I'm going to go home. Now here comes the interesting part. He said, "I'm going to say to my father that I have sinned against you. I have spent everything that you give me, even the good name that you gave me. I don't want to come back as your son, but take me back as a servant. I've sinned against heaven and I've sinned against you." And his father's answer to that was basically nonsense. That was his word, not what he said. He said, "You're not going to come back. You're my son. You were lost," and that's the key word here to what we're looking at. "And now you have been found." And there was a great celebration that took place in this. I think an awful lot about the first chapter of Romans when I read this, because it to me, it parallels so much what you see in the description that the Apostle Paul gave towards the Gentiles. In Romans, in the first chapter, in the 18th verse, he says, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Because that which is known about God is evident within them, For God made it evident to them, and since the creation of the world, the invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. But even though they knew God, they did not honor him as God, nor did they give thanks, but they became futile in their speculations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools. They exchanged the glory of the incorruptible God of an image in the form of a corruptible man, or of a bird, or of four-footed animals, or crawling creatures. Therefore God gave them over to their lust, and of their hearts to iniquity, that their bodies might be dishonored among them, and they exchanged the truth of God for a lie. They worshiped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever and ever. Amen. I see this paralleled in the prodigal son. Everything that is said about the Gentiles, and in fact, many theologians believe that the son represents the Gentiles, those that were lost. It could also very easily be those of the Hebrew race that were lost. But irregardless, he had what he absolutely needed, but he exchanged that which was the truth and the comfort that he had in his father's home. He chose to take what was coming to him and go all the way away from him, so that daddy couldn't watch, so that he could do what he wanted to, that he could choose the friends that he wanted, live the life that he wanted to. And as a result of it, God gave him over to the lie that he had made for himself. Does that sound familiar today? That hasn't changed a great deal since the beginning of time. And the interesting thing of it is that when the famine came, and famines come, whether it's a spiritual famine or whether it is a physical famine, as it was in this case, he was hungry. And I don't know about you, but whenever I get hungry, I begin to think how I'm going to get food. And I don't know whether I would eat a carob pot or not, but I haven't seen one, but might consider it. But the important part about this son, in deference to the other two scriptures that we've read in the last 2 weeks, is that he came to his senses. He woke up. The concept here, when he came to his senses or he came to himself, is kind of like what he was doing. The life that he was living was a form of insanity. He was not himself. He was something else had taken over his life. And of course, what took over his life was greed. He wanted his own power. It's not some kind of something that you would see in a movie today. Everything that brought him to where he was of his own choosing. But the part that I admire about this young man more than anything else is when he realized where he was and what was going on, he said, I can go home and be treated better as a servant than I am right here, right now. And I will go to my father, and I will tell him that I've sinned against you, and I've sinned against God. I've made a very bad series of choices. Now, I respect him for this. He didn't go part of the way and send a messenger up to see if it was okay for him to come on in. But when he left, he made a purpose of going directly to his father. That was his purpose. That's what he had set out to do. And when he got there, he was going to say, and did say, exactly what he had planned to when he left this foreign country. Now then, the father saw this son while he was still a long way off. He knew that silhouette. He'd seen it before.